because it is Mother's Day, I always feel like that I want to bring up the fact that in the Bible, a lot of times we hear about all the men. And it goes back clear back whenever Moses was bringing the people out of Israel, and he counted the people, but he only counted the men. Men who were 20 years and older, they were counted. And then there was always a side note, plus the women and children. When Jesus walked on this earth, and the two instances I think of especially are when he fed the 5,000. They only counted the men. And with the side note, plus the women and children. And then when he fed the 4,000, same thing. 4,000 men, 20 years and older, plus the women and children. And the reason I bring that up is because whenever there's a woman involved in the scripture, I think it should bear our attention. It should be brought to our special attention to what is being pointed out about them. Now, we have some that were brought out that were not really good examples. You know, Jezebel, for one. All the things that you should not do, here's her picture. And then, then you have some of them that were just, maybe don't even have a name in the scripture. And the one that I'm going to look at today, we don't have her name. But it bears special attention, I believe, because of what she did, who she was. A side note on this, I was watching the news the other day, and they was talking about the shooting that I believe was out in Colorado. And the police officer who was doing the interview, he says, I've got a video here I want to show you. And he says, I want to show you the picture of a mom who took care of her kids. And while it was a shooting that was in the mall, and it showed a video of the woman coming in with her toddler in a stroller and throwing the stroller over, grabbing the baby, putting it underneath her, and protecting it with her own life. And he says, this is a good mom. Fortunately, I don't believe anything happened to her. And then he went one step further, and he put up a picture of another woman. And he says, and this is the extreme opposite. This is the mother of those two that were doing the shooting that protected her kids and lied about them so that they wouldn't get caught. Said, but we caught one, and we're looking for the other. But I thought it was pretty neat that instead of just pointing out one, he pointed out the contrast of the one who was willing to sacrifice themselves, and then compared it to the extreme opposite of one, who was defending the wrongful actions of her own kids. Now, to keep this in mind, those kids had been in a lot of trouble a lot of times. So it wasn't like this was a first-time deal. What I want to look at today is a story of a woman who, in the Bible, she does not have a name, but God knew her. So if you turn with me to 2 Kings chapter 4, and I'm going to read the first passage, 8 through 17, just as a background for what I want to get at. And the reason I was going to skip over this, but as I read it, I guess I saw my wife in this very strongly, and you'll catch on to this, and some of you men will understand what I'm talking about. Now there came a day when Elisha passed over to Shunem. There was a prominent woman, and she persuaded him to eat food. And so it was, as often as he passed by, he turned in there to eat food. And she said to her husband, behold, now I perceive that this is a holy man of God passing by us continually. Please, let us make a little walled upper chamber, and let us set a bed for him there, and a table, and a chair, and a lampstand. And it shall be that when he comes to us, that he can turn in there. One day he came there and turned into the upper chamber and rested. Then he said to Gehazi, his servant, call the Shunammite. And when she had called her, she stood before him. And he said to him, say now to her, behold, you have been careful with us for all this care. What can I do for you? Would you be spoken for to the king or to the captain of the army? And she answered, I live among my own people. So he said, what then is to be done for her? And Gehazi answered, truly she has no son, and her husband is old. And he said, call her. When he called her, he stood in the doorway, and then he said, at this season next year, you shall embrace a son. And she says, no, my lord. O man of God, do not lie to your maidservant. And the woman conceived and bore a son at that season the next year, as Elisha had said to her. Now, the reason I wanted to read that was because here was a man of God who was passing through, and as he passed through, being the generous type person that she was, she invited him in to eat. And every time he came through, she invited him in to eat again. And she finally turns to her husband one day after she had done this for a while, and she said, I perceive that this is a man of God. She says, there's got to be something more we can do. And so she convinced him to turn this little chamber into a room for him to stay. And I guess the part that amused me, and it made me think of Sherry, says, and we'll put a bed in there, and we'll put a table, and we'll put a lamp there, and we'll just, we'll have it all decorated, and I'm sure there was a rug, and there's pictures on the walls, and there's snacks in the, in the cupboard, and everything that was there. I mean, because that's just who she is. And so every time he'd come in, he stayed there. And he was so appreciative of what she had done for him that after she had been going and staying there for a while, he turns to his servant Gehazi and he says, there's some way that we need to show appreciation for all that this woman has done for us. And he says, go and talk to her and says, would you like me to put in a word for the king or maybe the captain of the army for you? Is there anything that I can do to help you in any way or form? So he goes to the woman, the Shunammite woman, and he says, would you like to be mentioned to the king or maybe the captain of the army or, somebody important? Is there something that we can do for you? And her response was, she says, I live among my people. In other words, it's all good. I'm not doing this for benefit. I'm just doing this because it's who I am. So Gehazi comes back to Elisha, and he says, she really doesn't want anything out of this. And Elisha says, there's got to be something. And Elisha says, he says, she has no son, and her husband is getting older. And he says, perhaps. So Elisha goes to her, and he says, because of your kindness to me, by this time, whenever I come back next year, you'll have a son. And her response is, please don't deceive me. In other words, this is just beyond my wildest dreams. This is more than I could have ever hoped or asked for. She says, please don't be, telling me this if it's not going to come to pass. And she worshiped God at that time. Now then, let's go on. Verse 18. When the child was grown, the day came when he went out to his father to the reapers, and he said to his father, my head, my head. And he said to his servant, carry him to his mother. When he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her lap until noon, and then died. And she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God, and shut the door behind him, and went out. Then she called to her husband and said, please send me one of the servants and run, that I may run to the man of God and return. And he said, why will you go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she says, it will be well. In other words, don't worry about it. Then she saddled a donkey and said to her servant, drive and go forward, and do not slow down the pace for me unless I tell you. And she went and came to the man of God to Mount Carmel. And it came about, when the man of God saw her at a distance, that he said to Gehazi his servant, behold, yonder is a Shunammite. Please run now to meet her and say to her, is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with your child? And she answered, it is well. When she came to the man of God to the hill, she caught hold of his feet, And Gehazi came near to push her away, but the man of God says, "Let her alone, for her soul is troubled within her. And the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me." Then she said, "Did I ask for a son from my Lord? Did I not say, 'Do not deceive me'?" Then he said to Gehazi, "Gird up your loins and take my staff in your hand and go your way. If you meet any man, do not salute him, and if anyone salutes you, do not answer him, and lay my staff on the lad's face." And the mother of the lad said, "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." And he arose and followed her. Then Gehazi passed on before them and laid the staff on the lad's face, but there was neither sound nor response. So he returned to meet him and told him, "The lad has not awakened." When Elisha came into the house, behold, the lad was dead and laid on his bed. So he entered and shut the door behind them both, prayed to the Lord. And he went up and lay on the child and put his mouth on his mouth, and his eyes on his eyes, and his hands on his hands. And he stretched himself on him, and the flesh of the child became warm. Then he returned and walked in the house once back and forth, and went and stretched himself on him, and the lad sneezed 7 times, and the lad opened his eyes. And he called Gehazi and said, "Call this Shunammite." So he called her, and when she came in to him, he said, "Take up your son." Then she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself to the ground, and she took up her son and went out. Promised a son. Oh, that's more than I could have asked for. And she watched the child grow, and the child was growing and doing well, and he went out to be with his dad one day and was helping with the reapers. And while he was out there, he says, my head, got such a terrible headache. And I just tried to picture myself in this, and I thought, well, the dad probably first says, well, rub some dirt on it and see if that helps. And that didn't. Next best option, go to your mom. How many men have ever done that? Go to your mom. She'll take care of you. And lo and behold, she always does. So the boy goes in to his mom, and he lays his head down on her lap, and she comforts him and soothes him as best she can. But about noon, the child dies. So she takes up the child, takes it up to Elisha's room, lays him on the bed, calls for her husband, and it doesn't really say that she tells her husband what's went wrong, what has happened. She said, "Get me a servant, one of your servants, and a donkey, for I must go see the man of God." And the reason I don't believe that the husband even knew what was going on is because his response was, he says, "It's not a new moon or a Sabbath, it's not a special occasion. Why are you going to see him?" And basically her response is, "Don't worry about it. Just get me the servant and get me the donkey." So she gets on the donkey, she tells the servant, "Don't slow down, not for me. Don't take it easy on my account. We must get there as fast as we can." So don't slow down unless I tell you to. So they travel from where she is to Mount Carmel. When I looked on the map, that looks like it's 15, 20 miles. No small trek. She gets in the distance, and Elisha looks up, and he says, "Look, there's that woman, that Shunammite woman." And so he tells Gehazi, his servant, he says, "Go see about her. Ask her if everything's okay. Ask her if everything's all right with her husband. Ask her if everything's all right with her child." And Gehazi comes up and he says, "Are you all right? Is your husband all right? Is your child all right?" And she just kind of blows him off. She says, "As well," and never slowed down until she got to the feet of Elisha, and she fell at his feet and grabbed hold, and she told him what happened. And so Elisha takes his staff, and he hands it to his servant, and he says, "Make haste and get to that house, and whenever you get there, you take the staff and lay it on the child's head, that he might recover." And the woman says, "I'm staying with you, Elisha. This is where my hope is." And so they travel along behind. Gehazi goes, does not greet anybody along the way, does not allow anybody to slow him down. He makes haste, gets there, takes the staff, lays it on the child's head, and nothing happens. And so he goes back, catches up with Elisha and the woman, and he says, it's not worked. It hasn't helped. The boy's dead. And Elisha goes on in, gets there, goes into the house, shuts the door behind him and the servant, and he begins to pray. And as he begins to pray, he is led to lay his body upon that child's body. And he puts his mouth upon that child's mouth. He puts his eyes upon the child's eyes. He puts his hands on the hands of that child. And the warmth starts coming back into that body. But nothing happens. So Elisha gets back up, walks back and forth across the room, and then goes back and lays upon that child one more time. And when he lays on him the second time, the boy sneezes 7 times and wakes up. And he says, calling his mother. And he says, your son. And first thing she does is it says that she falls down and she worships God at the feet of the man of God. And then takes her son. Now, there's some things about this that I thought was really neat. You know, and I mentioned that women are not mentioned a lot in the Bible, but whenever they are, we ought to pay special attention to it. And I also know from experience that the churches, this church is one, and probably every other church that's got any history about it is the same, that there's been a time whenever it was the women who kept the church afloat. Because it was the women who taught the Sunday school. It was women who had the vacation Bible school. It was the women who cooked the meals for all the fellowship dinners. It was the women who got everything organized and made sure that things got done. It was the women who brought their kids to church, whether they wanted to come or not. Because they saw something in it that was so important. And it's always maybe puzzled me why the women did it. You know, I've heard a rumor, and I don't know if it's true or not, that women are more emotional than men. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. And maybe that has something to do with it. But the thing that I think I realize now is that women understand sacrifice better than anybody else. Mothers understand sacrifice. You know, when a woman becomes pregnant, she has to go through all the changes of her body. And then childbirth. And then once that child is there, then all the sleepless nights, all the dirty diapers, all the meal preparation, and then that constant question, what are they crying about now? And they understand that they have to give up so much of who they were before they become a mother for this child, but they willingly do it because they love that child so much. And so they understand the love that is behind sacrifice, I think, better than us men do. And so when they hear the gospel of Jesus Christ, who gave himself willingly for mankind, they understand that it wasn't just a sacrifice, but it was the love that went behind it. And so I think that's why women are better at really getting us started and their kids started at learning about God than anything else. This woman here did not have the knowledge of who Jesus Christ was going to be or who he was. But she had a knowledge of who God was. And she had a love for God. And there were some qualities about this woman that I think fit to a T a lot of good moms. And one is that moms nurture. They're better at nurturing. You know, my dad was strength, but my mom was the nurturer. She was the one who made sense of everything else. And women are good at that. They will go to great lengths for their children. You know, she nurtured her son, he died, and she wasn't going to take that for an answer. That was not going to be the end of her story. Whenever she got to the point where she was going after help, she didn't just take the first thing that came along, but she went straight to the source. When Gehazi comes up and he says, everything okay? She says, yeah, it's fine. Get out of my way. I'm going to go to the source. I'm going to go to the man who can really do something about this. And she goes to Elisha. And another thing that I think that is very important is moms never give up. No matter what we as their kids do, no matter all the reasons that we give them to give up, they never give up. They keep pushing for us. They keep loving us. They are generous. They are hospitable. They're more spiritually aware, I believe, than we men are. And they seek not their own, but the benefit of their kids. I think this describes this woman who does not even have a name in the Bible. And yet, she becomes a story that is worth telling and worth repeating over and over again, and it's a story that is worth modeling up to. You know, in our prayer out here before we started, I was thanking God for creating moms and women to be different than men. And everybody who loves your mom about has to agree with that. I mean, just think, if your mom was just like your dad, how would you have been different? You know, it's scary for me. It's scary for me. Here was a woman who saw her child as a true gift from God. And she just wanted to take care of him and love him and be the best mom for him. And whenever things happened, she was going to see and do everything that was within her power and go to the highest power to take care of her child. And she was rewarded for that. Now, unfortunately, a lot of moms don't ever feel the reward that maybe they should. But that doesn't stop them from loving their kids. And that's something that I think is just so special about what God put into the hearts of moms. I've been reading in Jeremiah this past week, and it was talking about in this one passage where there's coming a day in Jeremiah's time whenever we're not going to be having to follow a law, but God is going to write his law upon our hearts. And I think good moms follow their hearts. And we have been blessed by it. You know, I see our church, and I am just in awe of the love that the families have for their kids. And I so appreciate it. You know, I've been blessed with a good mom. Still got her. I don't know for how much longer, but she's been a great one. And I know that many of you can say the exact same things. But I also want to thank God for putting that within her heart to be the person that she is. And also being a role model for the rest of us. Just like this woman was. She made an impression upon her son, not giving up. But she also had to make an impression upon Elisha that he wrote that down. He kept track of it. The story just before this, in 2 Kings, is where Elisha stays with the widow during the drought. And he asked the widow, he says, would you make me a cake? And she says, I only have a small handful of flour and a small measure of oil, and I was going to make a cake for my son and I before we starve to death, because it's the last we've got. And Elisha says, would you make me a cake for it with it first? And she does. And whenever the drought was over, she was able to sell her measure of oil and her measure of flour and pay off all of her debts out of that once empty container, because she honored God with it. Let us be thankful to God for all of our good moms. Not just personally, but for all of our good moms. And let us thank God for creating them the way they are. Now then, with that being said, the one thing that your mom would want more for you than anything else is to know Christ as your Savior. To understand the love that is in the sacrifice that Christ made on our behalf. But just to make the sacrifice is not enough. It then has to be accepted. This morning, as we have gathered here for worship, if you've never accepted that sacrifice that Christ made for your behalf, make God happy, make Christ happy, and make your mom proud as a peacock by accepting it in your own life. Hymn of invitation this morning is the Old Rugged Cross, number 484, all verses. Won't you stand?